Hi, Deacon Ed McCormick here, and we're in the middle of the Easter season. And as we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus and the new life he brings to us in our world, I'd like to focus your attention today on the contrast between cruelty and mercy. It doesn't take much for any of us to identify acts of cruelty in our world. The Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Russian bombing of homes and hospitals and schools, kidnapping of Ukrainian children, Hamas's attack on Israel, Israel's bombardment and destruction of much of Gaza. But even in our own country, we're witnessing, it seems like on a daily basis, all kinds of acts of cruelty where citizens and non-citizens are not given due process, where people are being kidnapped off the streets. Graduate students are just kidnapped off the streets. International graduate students are having their visas revoked for no apparent reason. Just the other day, a 7-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, all U.S. citizens, were deported with their mother, and the youngest was suffering from cancer and was sent without any cancer medication. Just this morning, I saw an email with video of all kinds of people being taken by ICE with no apparent reason, mothers, children, fathers, and deported. We're seeing all kinds of other forms of cruelty as well. Funding cut off for cancer research, funding cut off for 9/11 victims, funding cut off for coal miners and the black lung disease that they suffer, funding cut off for sending foodstuffs to people in starving parts of the world, funding cut off for AIDS medication to poor people around the world. And so cruelty abounds today. And I'm sure in our own lives, we can identify acts of cruelty. Perhaps we have engaged in some of those ourselves. And in contrast to these acts of cruelty, I want to focus on how the resurrection of Jesus reveals to us that he is the mercy of God and that our God is a God of abundant mercy. Consider the scene that we heard about on Mercy Sunday, where the disciples are in the upper room, the door's locked, they're terrified that the next knock on the door will be from the Jewish and Roman leadership to take them and crucify them. And into the midst of their fear, into the midst of this locked room, appears the risen Jesus. He doesn't have a key. He doesn't seem to open the door or even go through the walls. He just appears in their midst. In the midst of their fear and anxiety, he comes to them. Now, I want you to notice, he's coming to the very people who fled him when he was arrested, who betrayed him, who in Peter denied him. So his very act of returning to them was this incredible act of forgiveness and mercy. And he doesn't have to even say it. They know it. And they're so overwhelmed by his presence that all fear flees the room and they're filled instead with joy. So the appearance of the risen Jesus to these disciples without a word of condemnation, without a reminder that they betrayed him and fled, none of that. It seems like it's impossible for him to condemn and to ridicule and demean. It's impossible because he is appearing to them not to get them back, not to remind them of how wrong they were, but out of God's abundant mercy. And his very presence offers those who betrayed and denied him God's forgiveness and God's mercy. And then he breathes on them and says, receive the Holy Spirit. Twice he says to them, peace, shalom. And this peace this Jewish peace doesn't just mean war is over. It means the restoration of relationships. And what he offers them, this restoration of relationships, he actually embodies in being with them. And it's not just that, he is offering them an experience of the beginning of the age of peace and shalom that God had promised through the prophets, especially in Isaiah 25. So that the presence of the risen Jesus is the beginning of the age of peace. And that age of peace means a healing and restoration and renewal of relationships. And that begins with Jesus and his disciples. So the risen Jesus offers to those who betrayed him and denied him God's peace. He offers them the Holy Spirit. I keep thinking, why would you go back to these guys? I wouldn't have. And instead of condemning them, you're offering the guys that betrayed you and denied you and fled from you God's Spirit, God's promised Spirit, God's shalom. You're offering them forgiveness. And so the event of the appearance of the risen Jesus is this radical reversal of the way our world works. Instead of cruelty and condemnation, he begins to open up a new way of relating by acting out of God's abundant mercy. And then he commissions them, he sends them out to begin to forgive people. And forgiveness means releasing people from the bonds of guilt, from identifying with terrible things they've done in the past. Forgiveness releases them from all of that, releases us from all of that, so that we can now begin to cultivate an identity out of the new future world and new relationship with Jesus that he opens up. And so, my friends, the resurrection of Jesus is this event of divine mercy. It's the launching of a world of mercy in the midst of a world of cruelty. And we are called to not live from the cruelty that's been done to us, from our wounds. We're called to live from Jesus' mercy and kindness. And we're called to embody that and live that out and share it with others. See you in the next video.